The classic Donkey Kong Country trilogy ended on November 22, 1996 with the release of Donkey Kong Country 3. Like its predecessor, the game gave the boot to its longest-running playable character, in this case Diddy Kong, and gave the spotlight to his girlfriend, Dixie Kong. Joining her this swing around is Kiddie Kong, the first playable character in Donkey Kong Country history to not have the initials DK. However, this is not the case in Japanese, where he has the name Dinky Kong. Both of these names reference the fact that Kiddie is only a toddler, which just makes this whole thing feel a little like child endangerment. The game would later be remade in 2005 on Game Boy Advance, and this is the version we'll be using today. In-game, Kiddie is described as Dixie Kong's cousin. However, that only seems to be the case in the English version. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not fluent in Japanese, but I just can't find any reference to him being Dixie's cousin anywhere in this scene in the Japanese version. And when we look further into the Japanese to try and find some source, things get a lot more interesting. While scrolling through the Japanese wiki, I found that instead Kiddie was listed as Funky Kong's cousin. This lines up with the manga, I'm sorry for this pronunciation, Uho Uho Daishizen Gag Donkey Kong, which also portrays Kiddie as Funky's cousin. I know that the game was developed by Rare, which is an English-speaking company, but the lore and consistency of the Mario universe is kept by Nintendo, and any future projects featuring these characters will likely need to align with the vision that Nintendo of Japan has of them. So honestly, it might just be canon that Kiddie Kong is Funky Kong's cousin rather than Dixie's. Getting back into the game, it opens up sometime after Donkey Kong Country 2, with Donkey and Diddy, now both video game heroes in their own right, deciding to go on an adventure together. Diddy leaves Dixie a note, promising that they'd return the next day. Now, the two of them going off on an adventure was a fairly normal thing, even if it did seem like they went a little further afield than usual, so she didn't worry. But the next day, they still hadn't come back. On the third morning, anxious about the two going missing, Dixie swam to the nearest shore south of DK Isle, which happens to be the Northern Krematoa. Despite the name, the Northern Krematoa does not include half the planet. More likely, it's just the northern part of the Kremling's sphere of influence. This is the place where many of the Kremlings also fled after she and Diddy had sunk the Crocodile Isle in the previous game. Once there, Dixie went to check in with Wrinkly Kong, who told Dixie that she'd seen the two pass by but didn't know where they went. Next, checking in with Funky, she learned that he also hadn't seen the two Kong heroes at all. In fact, the only other person he'd seen for the entire week was Kiddie, who he kinda pushed onto Dixie. Though despite that introduction, Kiddie seems to provide the raw muscle that Dixie was missing, so he definitely pulled his weight in this adventure. And with no other information, they borrowed a motorboat from Funky and went exploring. The Northern Krematoa is made up of 9 worlds, connected through a larger overworld. I won't go through all the worlds in detail, as there isn't a lot of detail to be had. That said, there are a few locations worth mentioning. About halfway through the game, Dixie and Kiddie enter Mekanos, a once beautiful island that had been overtaken and modernized by the Kremling crew. It is here that, for the first time, the two meet the new leader of the Kremlings, the robot known as KAOS. They do battle with it, but it manages to escape after a few hits. Also, it's worth mentioning that the GBA version added an entire extra world, Pacifica, which is a world found in caves beneath the waves. This sounds very similar to the secret final world of the game, Krematoa, which we'll discuss in a little bit. After Pacifica, Dixie and Kiddie enter KAOS Core, the true home base of the Kremlings, watched over by the haunting Castle Chaos. Entering the castle, the two once more come face to face with KAOS, and after a few hits, the robot gets knocked to the ground and dragged away by a crane. And that's the end of the story, right? Wrong. As KAOS disappears, a curtain in the back of the room rises, revealing the true mastermind behind this plan, Baron K. Roolenstein. That's right, the Mad Kremlin King has returned, this time under a new persona based on a minor German noble. The name is obviously a take on Baron Victor von Frankenstein, for the novel of the same name. But his reveal also gives off Wizard of Oz vibe. Also, despite having the Baron title rather than King in this game, this likely does not reflect his position in Kremling society, as he's once again shown as king in later games. This time, K. Rool has a very different boss fight from previous encounters, focusing a lot more on technology, including his fancy new barrel propeller pack, which uses to stay out of danger. But, as has happened so many times before, King K. Rool is defeated, hit by one too many bolts of lightning, a detail that once again calls out to Frankenstein. With his defeat, KAOS is knocked to the ground too, revealing its power source: Donkey and Diddy, who had been kidnapped in their sleep so they wouldn't be able to get in the way of the Baron's plans. But of course, he wasn't done yet. With his initial plans foiled and the Kongs freed, K. Rool descended into the lost city of Krematoa, now buried deep beneath the northern Kremisphere. The area is named for Krakatoa, a volcanic island in Indonesia. Initially, Krematoa was only believed to be a legend, and it was only with the help of the scholar Blunderbear that the heroic Kongs managed to infiltrate this new lost world. This is yet another example of what seems to be an ancient Kremling civilization falling into disrepair, alongside the temples on DK Isle, Kremlantis from the original Donkey Kong land, and the previous game's lost world beneath the Crocodile Isle. And even Pacifica from earlier in this very game. Clearly, something happened to this once great civilization a long time ago, but we never get any details about it. Inside the levels of Krematoa, Dixie and Kiddie can find cogs, which are used to raise a great submarine from the center of the lagoon. This machine is the Nautilus, named for the submarine from Jules Verne's novels. And here, K. Rool is defeated once more. He manages to escape, but his submarine is destroyed, leaving him stranded. Now earlier I mentioned Blunder Bear. He is one of 14 such bears found throughout the game. They are referred to collectively as the Brothers Bear. Each brother provides some sort of side quest for the Kongs to complete. Most of the time, and thanks for this help, the brothers would give the pair banana birds. Banana birds are pretty much what the name describes: birds that look like bananas. They serve the Banana Queen, a much larger and more powerful banana bird. However, before the events of the game, the Kremlings had managed to capture the Queen, leaving her birds scattered and lost. These orphan birds would be found by a number of NPCs in the game, including Funky Kong, Cranky Kong, and Swanky Kong, who would give birds to the heroic duo whenever they completed the minigames. These birds then would be sent to Wrinkly Kong. He ran a sanctuary in the main overworld. Once all the banana birds are saved, they band together and save their kidnapped queen. The queen then traps K. Rool in an egg, setting his scheming to an end, at least for the time being. The other Kongs in this area aren't exactly idle either. Swanky, of course, is still hosting his game show, though this one is more of a test of dexterity than knowledge. Cranky, meanwhile, has clearly had enough of these youngins fumbling these adventures, and is training himself to get back into fighting shape. Seeing as how he would eventually become a playable character in Donkey Kong Country Returns, it seems that training went very well. Funky, on the other hand, is doing more of what he was in the previous game, building machines for the other Kongs to use while also running secret military missions in the background. Much like in Country 2, this goes a long way towards making the conflict between the Kongs and the Kremlings feel more real. This time he has 4 missions. Destroy has the Kongs racing 10 Kremling ships to a goal, and they have to destroy them all before getting there. Disarm has the Kongs steal a number of naval mines and bring them back to Funky. Protect features the pair finding a number of civilian Kongs and bringing them to safety, similar to the missions in Country 2. However, there's something interesting about the Kongs in this game, as they include Donkey, Diddy, and Dixie, 3 Kongs involved in the story of the game. Given that Dixie can't very well save herself in this situation, and the minigames can be completed before Donkey and Diddy are saved from Castle Chaos, these missions are likely a representative of more generic Kongs rather than actually being specific characters. Which also means the appearance of Dixie's sister Tiny in the previous game is similarly not supposed to represent her. The final mission is Race, which is just a fairly straightforward 3-lap race against some Kremling boats with no clear strategic advantage other than saying, "We're better than you." And with that, we've hit the end of the numbered Donkey Kong Country trilogy. If a 4th game had happened, then I'm sure it would have focused on Kiddie Kong, but instead of stagnating with the same old format, Nintendo and Rare decided instead to enter a new dimension of DK. Okay, after a few other games too, we're not going to be talking about 64 quite yet, but that's coming, don't worry. The manual says that this game takes place a few months after Donkey Kong Country 2, so we're going to let this one settle comfortably after that game. And actually, I don't plan to place anything in between them, since Diddy is still celebrating his win in Country 2 at the start of this game. If Diddy had been on any other adventures in that time, I imagine that he wouldn't just be celebrating the same victory again. But if you're looking closely at my timeline every video, which, let's be clear, you're probably not, but, just in case, you may notice that this isn't the only change. Now we have some other timeline shenanigans to discuss. Between my Mario 64 video and now, I've actually started planning my timeline more than 2 videos ahead. And at the time of writing this script, I have placed every release up until Super Mario Sunshine. So to match that, I've shifted a few of the games we've already covered to compensate. First, I moved Mario Clash and Mario & Wario earlier in the timeline. After all, in the Mario Land 2 manual, Mario mentioned how this wasn't the first time that he and Wario had clashed. I doubt it's the first time that's happened since they've grown up either, since Mario didn't seem surprised to see Wario at all in that game. Because of that, we don't need to assume that every game with Wario in it is after Mario Land 2. And that gave me a chance to move a few of the games earlier in the timeline. I moved Mario Clash because of Donkey Kong Jr.'s design. He looks far younger than he did in Super Mario Kart and Mario's Tennis, and I felt like we needed more of a gap between those games. And in that same vein, I pushed Super Mario Kart and Mario Clash earlier as well, in order to give more space between Donkey Kong Country 1 and the last appearance of DK Jr. And I had to do that because I pushed the original Donkey Kong Country and Donkey Kong Land earlier as well. This is partially because of tie-ins with other games that would be released later, such as the original Mario Party games. That said, I'm leaving Country 2 where it is. These games don't need to be exactly next to each other. Also, at some point I guess I lost Yoshi's Safari. I don't know when that came off the timeline, I'm not going to go back and check, but I'm just going to kind of slide it back in there, and don't worry about it. And that's it for this video. Thanks for keeping up with me on all these timeline shenanigans. Hopefully now that I'm planning ahead, I won't need to keep doing these big shifts as I realize things going forward. And I guess that means it's time to let you go. So, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.